things we're seeing is some of these interesting headlines around what's happening with the sort of the private world, where they're struggling to raise capital. Some are shutting down. Some are even returning capital because they don't have the ability to deploy it or provide the returns that their LPs are looking for. And just overall, venture capital activity is slowing down. And some of it is still a byproduct of where we were a few years ago coming out of COVID. We're certainly also not seeing the valuations that we saw in 2021. Those are much lower today. So even the amount of funding that's going out is a lot less. It doesn't mean there's not any, it's less capital out there, but there's a lot of reasons that we're seeing why venture capital is going down, broadly speaking. And, you know, from a quarter to quarter perspective, we're seeing that not only funding is down, but total deals are down. And part of it's just a market saturation a little bit. There's lots of startups in, you know, the healthcare area as well as other areas. There's startups that aren't doing well, it's still a byproduct from the COVID era where lots of raised debt. They couldn't refinance that debt. They couldn't raise additional capital. So those are starting to shut down, which as a sidebar has led to actually a lot of consolidation where the private equity market is actually doing quite well in consolidating assets. There's been limited exits. Even our fund, we've gone 2 years without exit, which is unusual. Usually we've gone every year, it's 5 or 6 exits every year. We do 5 or 6 new investments, just a nice rolling sort of program. Not happening. We're up to 44 portfolio companies right now, which is rather big for us, but there's limited exits. High interest rates still exist, so even trying to get debt, if you're a company, is very difficult. And if you happen to get it, the rates are going to be so high that it's probably not even worth getting that kind of debt in the first place. We still have lingering inflation, and there's a lot more scrutiny on deals. Even, you know, us as a corporate, we're looking a lot more closely at the deals. What's the viability of the company? You know, it's not just strategic in the end as well. You know, our fund is both financial and strategic. We need to make sure that we build a viable company from a finance perspective. And we believe if you do that, that brings strategic returns. So you actually have to have a really strong company. So both the corporate and the private are looking much more closely at deals and aren't funding as many deals as they did before. And they're being very picky and choosy about the kind of deals that they're going to fund. So the whole market has shifted quite dramatically over the last few years. And then there's a lot of restraints discouraging founders more than ever. VCs, whether it's corporate or not, are putting pressure for high growth. We're prioritizing faster growth than we did before. You know, in the past, you might let an A round company go 3 or 4 years before, you know, they get to that growth round to build their company. They're expecting it in a lot shorter period of time. Equity dilution. Certainly when we see lower valuations, you know, the equity for the founders is decreasing, but we're asking for more for less money. And that's kind of the shift that's happened over the, in the last few years, where before it was sort of a founder's market, now it's an investor's market again. So it's kind of changed over time. We sometimes see misalignment of goals. You know, what we're trying to do as an investor don't always match what the C-suite wants to do with the company. And there's also then a misalignment of goals amongst investors, where the syndicate in itself isn't in agreement on what to do with the company. And that leads to issues around raising capital for the company moving forward. And then sometimes what we're seeing, recently is forcing the company to exit quickly, even though the profit is small, just getting the company off your books. And so when you sit there and say, well, gee, you got 44 portfolio companies, what are you going to do? Yeah, we'd love to exit them as well. We're a little different as a corporate because most corporates aren't in this necessarily for the money. They don't need to return anything to their LP immediately. So we have time. And so we're not usually forcing that. We tend to see that more with our private finance partners. But the good news is corporate venture capital is growing. And we're seeing it over time that the CVC growth has really gone up, quite dramatically. And in fact, we saw in 2024, 48% of companies were funded by corporate venture, up from 2013, where it was only 34%. So part of it, there's just more corporates, and part of it is we have more capital to deploy. A lot of corporates as well as an investor, because we do a lot for these companies that the privates can't do, and we'll get into what some of those things are, we fail less than the VC-backed companies. So again, we tend to stay around much longer as well. We don't necessarily exit, after one round. We tend to follow on quite a bit, and that's a positive. And we have the ability to take losses on a quarterly basis as well if the company's growing. If we're reporting that up through our accounting, we can actually stay with the company much longer. So the whole idea really is that we're very active investors as corporates. And the whole purpose of this talk really is just to get you to start thinking about why corporates, might make a difference for what you're trying to do. So we offer more than money. Yeah, we have money like everybody else, but we do offer some things that the privates can't offer. One of the main things is that we can offer extensive technical and research capabilities. We are experts in what we do. And so from an advisory perspective, beyond capital, we can tap you into the company just to talk to people. And that's a pretty important thing in learning how to work with an industry. A lot of times when we invest in a company, they don't have an understanding of how to work with pharma. They have an interesting product, but they don't know how to speak to pharma, and we help them through that process of how do you work with a pharmaceutical company. And that's an important thing to do. We have better investment alignment typically because, again, as a strategic, we invested you for a reason. We either think you're important to not only our company, but probably to our industry. And we take, as our fund, we take more of an industry approach first. So we think if it's good for the industry, it's obviously going to be good for Merck. And if it's good for Merck, it's going to be good for the industry. So we take a more holistic view of what's happening. There's a lot of collaborative synergy as well. Obviously the main thing we want to do is once we do an investment, the holy grail is to do a commercial agreement along with that investment where Merck is putting capital, into the company as revenue, but they're also learning how to work with you as a company and bettering their business. So, the whole goal in the end is, do we get something out of it as Merck, but you get something out of it as the portfolio company, and that alignment is really important. The other thing I think that we can help with is we have access to all parts. So this is healthcare specific, but we have access to all parts of healthcare, whether it's payer, provider, distributors. So making those kind of introductions as well across the value chain is an important piece that corporates can play. Again, they know their industry pretty well. They're connected to every part of their industry, and they can make those kind of connections and introductions as well. And then there's obviously unique exit potential. A corporate typically is a potential buyer of these assets, and we see it quite a bit. In fact, and I'll tell you, in healthcare, the majority of the exits that we see go to other corporates. Not necessarily just pharma, but just other corporates that play in healthcare. Which is an important component, as well as that we're seeing recently is a lot of private equity buyers as well. This is just an example of GHI and what we've done. We have two investments in the supply chain area, and it's all around data, but we have a company called Transvoyant, a company called CargoSense. And one of the things we ended up doing is realizing both those companies had gaps, and we asked them to work together. And what we ended up doing was doing a sort of a CEO summit where we have the capability to bring these CEOs together and have them understand what the problems are in the supply chain, not only for pharmaceutical companies, but the industry as a whole, and then how do they then work together to solve those kind of problems. That's an interesting thing that corporates can do from the standpoint of bringing parties together to work together to actually solve a bigger problem that exists within the industry. So they don't become just point solutions, right? And then, the idea could be over time, do we merge these companies together because they're very, very complementary to each other? And then you start to build scale. And that's the way we're starting to think about it with these two particular type of companies. But the future of CVC, as I said, there's over 5,000 today. It's going to continue to grow. They're not going to go away, and they're going to play a more important role in the future of funding as we think about it. I think operational involvement is going to even grow. I think, what we're even seeing is just because of the expertise that we bring, we tend to be a more dominant player even at the board level as we begin to then push the company forward around the way they operate. The other interesting thing that's starting to happen is sort of these hubs, these innovation hubs that are happening. CVCs not only can do corporate venture, but they have innovation hubs around the world or even accelerators around the world. And we can get companies to get started even in earlier stages if it's not necessarily areas that we invest in. And so these hubs become important as centers of excellence where we can bring all sorts of different capabilities together, from a funding and finance perspective. And I think, for all industries, the use of AI is going to change the way we think about the way we work with our companies, how decision making is going to occur within the portfolio companies. And so driving that capability, into the companies is going to be an important part that the corporate can play. And in the end, you're going to see much more collaboration from a VC perspective. And as I said, the main thing you should think about if you're looking for funding is you need both corporate and private investors. That's actually your best syndicate because everybody brings in a different expertise. I wouldn't just do all corporate. I wouldn't just do all private investors, but have a nice combination of both. But really, the whole purpose was just to get you to think about that corporates are out there, and they're in whatever industry you're in. And this is healthcare, obviously dedicated here, but no matter what, there's a lot of corporates that are out there that want to invest and are ready to invest and are willing to help, if you're a startup company. A little bit about our fund, and I only want to raise this because typically after I do a talk like this and everybody that's an entrepreneur comes in and grabs me and wants me to fund their company, just so you understand where we sit. So we're a growth investor. We will do an A and B round occasion, but we're that company that comes in at the C round or later, and we write that big check, and we're looking to reform the company. We might make changes in the C-suite. We might have board members. We're here to do the big check that blows the company out into the next stage and gets it prepared for exit. That's when we typically come in. We do an A and B round occasionally if it fits a broader ecosystem that we're thinking about or playing in, where we can do that mix and match of companies. We have a large C company that is missing. They have a gap, but an A and B round company can fill that gap. We'll do that investment to fill that gap, and then we get those companies to work together. But we're mostly that growth investor. We don't do any startup or seed capital either. The other thing is we only invest in what we call pharma services. And as simple as it sounds, if the pharmaceutical industry or company needs a service, that's where we invest. We're not all across healthcare. It's really just pharma service. What I mean by that is if you think about how a pharmaceutical value chain works, we invest in R&D, so things like AI and ML, and drug discovery, target ID. We look at radiology and pathology platforms. Better ways to create efficiency so our industry and Merck can do better R&D. We do clinical development, so the whole clinical trial space. We're looking at efficiencies there and how do we do better clinical trials. We invest in supply chain and manufacturing, so it's mostly around data. How do you may not realize, but pharma loses a good percentage of our products once they leave the warehouse to theft, fraud, damage because we ship it the wrong way. It should have done by plane. We send it by boat. We make those kind of mistakes. So what we're trying to think about is how do you build like an airport control tower and manage all incoming goods and all exiting goods, and that's kind of the way we're thinking about it. We do on the commercial side is the most difficult side. As a pharma-owned VC, we can't do certain things because of anti-kickback statutes. But we do look at things around patient access and quality of care and those types of things, and clinical decision support tools, monitoring. So certain things that we are allowed to do as a pharma company, but it's limited just because of the anti-kickback statutes that we are under. And the last place is real-world evidence and data. We're looking to invest in data assets that give Merck access to data worldwide, as well as analytics and informatics. So that's kind of just where we operate as a fund, but it's basically just what we call pharma services. So with that, what I'll just ask you to do is, think about corporate venture next time you're thinking about fundraising, and we're out there and looking to help. Thank you.